Citizens speak out. People standing up for principles of shared safety, stability, freedom, and improved living conditions for all continue gathering in countries like Chile, Egypt, Greece, Israel, Jordan, Libya, Malaysia, Pakistan, Palestine, Syria, United Kingdom, and Yemen.
United Kingdom. On Thursday, July 7th, Prime Minister David Cameron promised that 2 separate and thorough investigations would be made into the media scandal involving journalists from the British weekly News of the World. Besides recent allegations of phone hacking into the voicemail of crime victims and families of slain soldiers, police corruption charges have now surfaced, with several officers being accused of accepting payment from the newspaper's reporters for information.
Greece. On Friday, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, approved a €3.2 billion loan installment to Greece, the fifth in a multi-billion aid package co-sponsored by the IMF and the European Union to assist the Greek government in remaining solvent and being able to pay its debts.
Chile. Having held massive protests by the tens of thousands this past week in Santiago, which riot police used water cannons to dispel, Chilean students continue to demand a solution that brings more affordable and better quality state education for all.
Egypt. Tens of thousands of protesters from all major political parties gathered Friday in Cairo's Tahrir Square in the city of Suez to demand faster trials for police and former government figures as well as greater progress on political reforms. Tahrir Square protesters pledged to stay until certain demands are met, including the release of all citizens sentenced by military courts and their retrial in civil courts. The protesters also organized security themselves following an announcement by Interior Minister Mansour el-Essawi that no police would be present, with several people who were handed to Egyptian security to ensure that the event remained peaceful.
Malaysia. Despite government efforts to prevent a demonstration by closing train stations and positioning trucks with water cannons near the stadium in Kuala Lumpur, where protesters were planning on gathering, over 20,000 people defied a government ban on a rally on Saturday to demand electoral reform. Using batons and tear gas, riot police detained over 1,600 people, including senior minority party officials, women, and children.
Palestine and Israel. At the International Ben Gurion Airport outside Tel Aviv, Israel, security forces on Friday blocked a Palestinian press event as they arrested a group of Israeli activists already at the airport and intercepted several dozen others who had arrived with a goal of visiting Palestinians in the West Bank. At least 200 more were prevented from ever boarding their Israeli-bound flights after officials sent out a list of activists to airlines with warnings that they would delay the flights or even force them to return. Another 120 travelers were denied entry on arrival. Activists in France staged protests at Charles de Gaulle Airport, saying that the airlines had unfairly restricted their travel, while organizers of the Welcome to Palestine West Bank event similarly spoke out against the airline's compliance with the Israeli travel restrictions.
Meanwhile, Israel last week, for the first time in 3 years, seized uncultivated land in the Palestinian West Bank. The land, which belongs to the Palestinian village of Kiryat, was taken by the Israeli government to retroactively legalize a settlement based on a law dating back to 1889, at the time of the Ottoman Empire. However, this action also violates a commitment Israel made to the international community not to take Palestinian lands for settlement expansion, with the settlements themselves already deemed illegal according to international law.
Egypt. In meetings with Palestinian officials on Thursday, Egyptian delegates affirmed plans to increase the number of Palestinians allowed to travel across the Rafah border crossing.
Jordan. Hundreds of Jordanians protested in cities across the country on Friday, calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Maruf Bakit, who is viewed by many as corrupt because his previous cabinet had approved the kingdom's first casino, which violates the Islamic law banning gambling. They also called for the lower house of parliament to be dissolved and for a new government to be formed for more significant reforms.
Pakistan. The government deployed 1,000 additional police and paramilitary troops in Karachi on Friday to help restore security in Pakistan's largest city, where at least 100 people were reported to have been killed since Monday by illegally armed groups. Ambulances and armored vehicles have been dispatched to evacuate families who had been trapped inside their homes for several days. However, Amnesty International has spoken out against the Pakistani government's orders that security forces should immediately fire upon any armed men suspected of being involved in the violence.
On Friday, in a statement quoted by the Associated Press of Pakistan, a government spokesperson characterized the remarks of a U.S. military official as extremely irresponsible when it was reported that U.S. Admiral Mike Mullen said that the Pakistani government had sanctioned the killing of journalist Saeed Salim Shahzad. The Pakistani spokesperson went on to say that if there is evidence linking the government to Mr. Shahzad's death, it should be provided to the Judicial Commission that is conducting an investigation.
Yemen. A day after Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh appeared in a long-awaited televised address, rallies were held Friday in the capital Sana'a by some in support of President Saleh, while tens of thousands of others in Sana'a and Taiz continued demanding that he step down. Supporters of the Yemeni president were also observed to fire on protesters, with at least 11 citizens dying of gunshot wounds.
Syria. On Friday, hundreds of thousands rallied in the capital Damascus in cities like Homs, Medan, and Dumair, demanding the end of the rule of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Over 500,000 also gathered in the streets of Hama, a city that has been besieged this past week by security forces.
Libya. Libyan revolutionaries advanced to the capital Tripoli Friday after gaining control of two smaller towns earlier in the week. Meanwhile, government forces fired from tanks near the city of Misrata with at least 2 activists who were killed. Meanwhile, on Friday, United Nations officials stated that it is preparing to ease certain sanctions previously imposed against the country to ease current shortages of essential medical and other supplies.
As we mourn the lives lost in the distress of the injured, we pray for the strife in all countries to subside, with citizens everywhere deciding to live in shared safety, dignity, and peace.